When I was younger, I used to think I had it all figured out. Love was simple, right? You meet someone, fall for them, and everything else just works itself out. That's what all the movies and books told me. But as I got older, life taught me a very different lesson. Love isn't simple. It's messy, it's confusing, and sometimes it's downright painful. Back then, I had a set of beliefs I clung to, almost like a shield. I believed that if I worked hard enough, I'd become the man everyone respected, the man who had the money, the status, the success. And with all of that would come the love I dreamed of, the kind you see in happy families or picture-perfect holiday cards. But deep down, there was another side to that belief, a fear I couldn't shake. I worried I'd never be enough. Not rich enough, not smart enough, not successful enough. Those thoughts followed me everywhere, especially when I was with Rachel. She was everything I ever wanted, kind, supportive, funny. But every time I looked at her, I felt this weight, like I was somehow failing her, and then there were the quiet moments of doubt. What if she was secretly disappointed in me? What if one day, she realized she could do better? It's not like she ever said anything to make me feel that way, but those fears had a way of whispering in my ear when everything else was quiet. Looking back now, I realize how much those insecurities shaped my decisions. I was so focused on proving my worth, to myself, to Rachel, to the world, that I didn't see what was slipping through my fingers. It's funny how you can convince yourself you're protecting someone you love, when in reality, you're just running from your own fears. But at the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being noble by letting her go, giving her the chance to be with someone who could give her everything she deserved. Little did I know, that decision would change everything. The day I told Rachel it was over, I thought I was being brave. Noble even. After all, what kind of man would I be if I kept dragging her along in a relationship that couldn't offer her everything she deserved? I had just come off another disappointing meeting with a potential investor. I could see the disappointment in their eyes, the same way I saw it in Rachel's. I wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed more time, more money, more success. But I couldn't say that to her, not when she had dreams of her own, dreams I could barely help her with. So, I made the decision. I told her it was time to part ways, that we needed space, that she deserved someone who could give her more of everything. She looked at me, her eyes wide and searching. I could see the hurt, the confusion, but also something else, something I couldn't bear to face, disappointment. Mike, what are you talking about? We've built something real. You don't have to prove anything to me. But I didn't believe her. I couldn't. She was too good for me, too perfect. I'd failed her by not being the man I thought I should be. In that moment, I convinced myself that this was for her own good, for her future, for her happiness. If I truly loved her, I'd let her go, give her the freedom to find someone who had it all together. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. But I couldn't take it back. The words were already out. I watched her leave, her expression unreadable, as if everything she thought we had just crumbled to dust. I kept telling myself I was doing the right thing, that this was love in its purest form, letting her go so she could be free. But deep down, I knew I was just running away from the fear that I wasn't enough. That night, as I lay in bed alone, a wave of regret hit me like a freight train. I tried to push it away, to justify my actions. But I kept hearing her voice, asking me over and over, "Why, Mike? Why?" The truth was, I didn't have a real answer. I was too afraid to face what I had done, to admit that, in the name of sacrifice, I had destroyed the one thing that truly mattered. The days that followed were a blur, and not the kind of blur where everything's moving too fast. No, this was the kind where time dragged on, each second stretching longer than the last. I threw myself into work, as I always did, hoping that if I kept my head down, I could bury the guilt and regret that gnawed at me. I built walls, emotionally, physically, around myself. At first, it felt like I was doing the right thing. I was focused, determined. I could be the man I had always told myself I would be. But the more I tried to ignore the ache in my chest, the worse it became. Every morning, I woke up alone in an empty bed, the absence of Rachel's warmth a stark reminder of the decision I had made. I tried to throw myself into the grind, into the cold logic of business deals, and yet, nothing could fill the hole she had left. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was punishing myself for what I had done. Punishing myself for thinking that stepping away from her would somehow make her life better. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had destroyed the one thing in my life that mattered most. I began to spiral. I tried dating again, but it felt like I was living in someone else's skin. The connection that Rachel and I shared, it wasn't just about love, it was about understanding, about being part of each other's worlds in ways that no one else could replicate. Every time I looked at another woman, I felt empty. I could hear Rachel's laughter in the back of my mind, the way she would hold my hand just a little tighter when things got tough. How could I move on from that? How could I replace someone who had seen me at my worst and still chose to love me? The worst part was the guilt. It lingered, sitting like a rock in my stomach. I kept telling myself that if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, maybe Rachel would come back. Maybe, if I could just show her that I had it all together now, that I was the man I promised I would be, she'd see me as worthy again. But the harder I worked, the more isolated I became. I couldn't stop thinking about what she must have been going through. Was she hurting as much as I was? Had I truly given her what she deserved, or had I robbed her of something real? The truth haunted me. This wasn't just about proving I could be successful. It was about redemption. I needed to redeem myself for breaking her heart, for making her believe she wasn't enough. And so, I kept pushing forward, desperate to fix the damage, desperate to become the man who could stand in front of her and say, "I'm ready. I'm truly ready now." But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I realized that the man I was trying to be wasn't the man I needed to become. It wasn't long before reality hit me in the face, hard. I'd been running from the truth, pretending that my decision to let Rachel go was somehow noble. But the longer I tried to convince myself of that, the more I felt the crushing weight of my mistake. The loneliness wasn't just a feeling anymore, it was my constant companion. One night, I ran into an old friend, Mark. We used to hang out together back when Rachel and I were still happy. He saw the pain on my face and, out of nowhere, asked the question I had been dreading. "What happened, Mike? You seemed so sure about your decision. But you don't look so sure now." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. The truth was, I hadn't been sure at all. I'd been terrified. Terrified that I couldn't give Rachel what she needed. Terrified that I was failing her. Terrified that I wasn't enough. But instead of confronting that fear, I chose the cowardly path. I pushed her away, thinking that would somehow make her life better. As I stood there, fumbling for words, I realized just how much I had lied to myself. I had told myself I was doing it for her, but deep down, I had been protecting my own fragile ego. I wasn't ready to face the truth, that I had let the fear of failure destroy something beautiful. I had been afraid of not being enough, so I chose to be nothing at all. I spent the next few days wrestling with that truth. The guilt and regret were overwhelming, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to admit to myself that I wasn't the man I thought I was. I had messed up, and now I had to figure out how to fix it before it was too late. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Every day, I woke up to the emptiness, the silence, the guilt that seemed to echo louder than any success or accomplishment. I had done it. I had pushed Rachel away for all the wrong reasons. Now I was left with nothing but the fragments of what we had once shared, memories that hurt to hold on to. But I couldn't just walk away from everything. I had to try to make things right. The thought of reaching out to Rachel terrified me. I didn't know if she would even want to hear from me, let alone give me a second chance. But I couldn't live with the regret of never trying. I had spent so long convincing myself that I was doing the right thing by letting her go. But now I knew better. I had to fight for her, fight for us. I called her. My hand shook as I dialed her number, and when she picked up, I almost lost my nerve. "Mike? Is everything okay?" Her voice sounded so different, strained, distant. It broke my heart. "Rachel, I've made a huge mistake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to hear me out. I've been living in a lie, and I'm sorry for hurting you." There was a long silence on the other end. My heart raced as I waited for her response, but I knew I had to say it all. "I was afraid, Rachel. Afraid of failing, afraid I wasn't enough. I thought pushing you away was the best thing, but I was wrong. I was selfish. And I can't live with that." Finally, she spoke. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "Mike, I don't know if I can just forget what happened. But I hear you. I hear how much you regret it." That was all I needed, her acknowledgement. The conversation didn't fix everything, but it was a start. I didn't expect her to forgive me right away, or to suddenly jump back into my arms. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like there was hope. I wasn't completely lost. We weren't completely lost. After that phone call, I wasn't sure what to expect. Rachel didn't promise anything, she didn't give me false hope. But just knowing that she was willing to listen, that she hadn't shut me out completely, gave me something I hadn't had in a long time: hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. I kept thinking about that conversation. Her words replayed in my mind over and over again, especially the way she said, "I hear you." It was a small thing, but it felt like the first crack in the wall I had built between us. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us to rebuild what we had lost. Days passed, and we started talking more. We exchanged texts at first, short, cautious messages, the kind that told you both that you were trying but still unsure. Then we moved to phone calls, slowly finding our way back to the connection that had once been so natural between us. It wasn't easy. There were moments of awkward silence, times when I wasn't sure if I was pushing too hard, but then there would be moments when she would laugh at something I said, or I'd catch a hint of the warmth in her voice, and I'd remember why I had fallen in love with her in the first place. But it wasn't just about rekindling the past. I realized that if we were ever going to make it work again, we needed to confront everything that had gone wrong. I couldn't keep running from the truth. I needed to be honest about why I had pushed her away in the first place: fear. Fear of failure, fear of not being enough. But now I understood that it wasn't about being perfect. It was about being real, being vulnerable, and trusting each other again. I wasn't sure where things would go, or if Rachel was even ready to give me another chance, but I knew that this was the beginning of something. It wasn't going to be easy, but at least we were both trying. And that, for me, was enough to believe that love could still heal. Things were changing, but not without effort. As much as I wanted things to go back to the way they were, I knew it wasn't that simple. Trust had been broken, and that wasn't something you could just fix overnight. Each day was a new test, one where I had to prove I wasn't the same person who had pushed Rachel away before. We started spending time together again, but it wasn't like it had been. Every moment felt heavier, loaded with the weight of unspoken words, past hurts, and lingering doubts. Rachel wasn't quite ready to let go of her pain, and honestly, I wasn't sure I was ready to let go of mine either. I had been so afraid of failure before that I didn't see how I was failing her in the process. The guilt I carried every time I looked at her was almost unbearable. But despite all of this, something beautiful was beginning to happen. Slowly, we started to talk more openly about what had happened, the misunderstandings, the fears, and the missed opportunities to communicate. It wasn't easy. There were tears, and at times, I felt like we might never find our way back. But then there were moments when I could feel the old connection, the one that had once been so natural. It was fragile, but it was there. Rachel was still cautious, and I understood why. She had every right to be. I had betrayed her trust, and no matter how much I wanted to move forward, I had to wait for her to be ready too. I couldn't rush her healing. She needed to take her time, just like I did. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when the weight of my past mistakes seemed too much to bear. But then I'd remember the first time we laughed together again, how it felt to hear her voice without that distance between us. We were slowly rebuilding brick by brick, but it was happening. And for the first time in a long time, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. We weren't there yet, but we were on the right path. It wasn't until one quiet evening that I truly felt like we were beginning to heal. After weeks of awkward conversations and strained silences, Rachel and I found ourselves sitting together on the porch, just watching the sunset in companionable silence. It was in those moments of stillness that I began to understand just how much we had been through and how far we had come. The tension had softened. We weren't exactly where we needed to be, but we were no longer stuck in the past either. Rachel broke the silence, her voice calm but carrying an emotion I hadn't heard in a while. "Mike, I think we're both scared. We're both scared of getting hurt again. But I don't want to be afraid anymore." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It was like she had put into words everything I had been feeling, everything I had been avoiding. We had both built walls to protect ourselves, me from failure, and her from being hurt again. But what if we could let those walls come down? What if we could finally trust each other, not to be perfect, but to be real? I reached for her hand, feeling a connection I hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm scared too, Rachel," I admitted. "But I'm ready to take that risk. I'm ready to try again, to rebuild what we've lost. I can't promise you it will be easy, but I promise I'll be here. I'll be here for you." For the first time since everything had fallen apart, I truly felt like we were starting over. It wasn't a sudden change or a dramatic shift, but in that moment, I realized that love wasn't about perfection. It was about being willing to fight for each other, even when it seemed impossible. As we sat there, holding hands, I knew the road ahead would still be rocky. We had a lot to work through, and we both knew it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. We weren't giving up on each other, we were rediscovering each other. We were choosing to love each other, flaws and all, and that meant more than any perfect relationship could ever offer. The days that followed were a blend of cautious optimism and renewed affection. Rachel and I had finally reached a place where we could talk openly about our dreams that we'd almost forgotten during the chaos of the past. We began to make plans for the future, not as individuals, but as a team, remembering what it felt like to have each other's back. We went on long walks together, rediscovered our favorite restaurants, and even found ourselves laughing at the little things that had once brought us closer. It was in these simple moments that I realized something important. The love we shared didn't have to be perfect, but it had to be real. We didn't need to have it all figured out right away, but we needed to be committed to figuring it out together. The days that followed were a blend of cautious optimism and renewed affection. Rachel and I had finally reached a place where we could talk openly about our dreams that we'd almost forgotten during the chaos of the past. We began to make plans for the future, not as individuals, but as a team, remembering what it felt like to have each other's back. We went on long walks together, rediscovered our favorite restaurants, and even found ourselves laughing at the little things that had once brought us closer. It was in these simple moments that I realized something important. The love we shared didn't have to be perfect, but it had to be real. We didn't need to have it all figured out right away, but we needed to be committed to figuring it out together. One afternoon, as we sat at a cafe, sipping coffee and talking about our future, Rachel looked at me with a kind of quiet understanding. "Mike," she said softly, "I'm not saying it's going to be easy. We still have a lot to work through. But I want to keep trying. I want to see where we can go from here." And in that moment, I realized that we had made it. The worst of it was behind us. We were no longer bound by the fear of the past. We were standing on the edge of something new, something better. I couldn't help but smile. "I'm with you, Rachel. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I know we've been through hell, but we're not just surviving anymore. We're thriving." And with those words, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had spent so long fighting the past, trying to undo my mistakes, but I realized now that I didn't have to change what happened. All I had to do was commit to the future. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready. We started making real plans together again, traveling, moving forward with careers, and even talking about things like a family. The future felt full of promise, Not because everything had been fixed, but because we had made a choice. We were choosing each other every day, in big ways and small. Love isn't just about finding someone who can make you feel good, it's about finding someone who can help you grow. Someone you can build a life with, even when things are messy. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just rebuilding a relationship, I was building a future with the woman I loved, and that was all I needed.